Hello and welcome to this getting started video for the SQM app. Caseware is a cloud-based application. There are two parts to this app. First, settings, and then the application itself. Let's have a look at that. Let's start with settings. Settings includes two elements. Firstly, the administration for network objectives, risks, policies, procedures, and tasks. So in other words, where you will administer the required objectives, etc., that your network has sent to you if you are a network member firm. Now that happens under settings, and you scroll right to the bottom to see the SQM settings. There you have the option to import a file that was given to you by the firm. You have the objectives where you can, if you don't want to import, you can manually add objectives. Now, later on in the video, you will see exactly how we add objectives. It will be exactly the same way. You will click on add and complete the information. This will then be recorded as a network required objective. The same will happen with risks, where you have your add button, policies, procedures, etc. Also note that once you've imported it, these ones will reflect here. The second element to settings is the permissions that we need to set. Now that is set under the staff or group settings. Let's start by looking at group. For group settings, I've already created a group for us, engagement partners. I will go and edit that. In the apps section, I will scroll down to the SQM section. Users will always have the create permission role because they will all need to create tasks later on. But the advanced roles are whether a user or group of users should have access to the modules of design, operate, or operate overview. If you therefore use groups, staff groups in this case, you can allocate staff members to these elements through their groups. You can, however, also allocate these permissions to each individual staff member, or to perhaps to staff members that aren't in groups if you have them. If I then go to not groups but to staff, and I go and find a specific individual, I can also, in editing his roles, give or take away from his permissions, allocating some items, and then clicking save. That brings us to the end of settings. Let's look at the application itself. The application has three modules: design, operate, and operate overview. In design, the person with ultimate responsibility for the firm's compliance with ISQM 1 or the operational responsibility individual or individuals will be working and designing the firm's system of quality management. In other words, your normal staff won't have access to this part. Let's have a look at what is included in design. First of all, responsibilities. Now, in responsibilities, you will indicate which of your users are fulfilling the role or taking the responsibility of either the person with ultimate responsibility and accountability or the person with operational responsibility, and then where you have specific individuals with only the monitoring responsibility or only the independence responsibilities. For operational responsibility, that is, then you can also allocate them specifically. How do you add them? You can see that I've already added a few users here. So I will just add a new user, select a specific user from our cloud user listing. So I can also look for a specific person, and I will then assign Christian with the operational responsibility for monitoring and remediation. If I have already had the engagement or appointment letter signed by him, where he has also signed off on specific responsibilities, I can load that up to Caseware Cloud and include the URL here so that one can just follow through to that letter via a hyperlink. For now, I'm not including any specific appointment letter. Select OK, and your new responsibility has been assigned. In the case of Christian, he can then go and accept this responsibility. I won't be signing off on his behalf, so I will sign off my own responsibility as OR. Accepting that responsibility, I can have a look at the responsibility that I am signing for or accepting and click accept. If I was also the UR, or a person that can review, obviously it doesn't make sense that I sign off my own, I can then also approve the assignment of this responsibility for the person. Simply read there, click accept, and that role has now been allocated. And you can do that for a number of users, as many as you need to. So to conclude, a person can have more than one responsibility, such as the ultimate responsibility or operational responsibility. And if you feel it is appropriate, you can also allocate more than one person to a responsibility. And that is responsibilities. Moving on to setup, there are two activities that takes place in setup. Firstly, you will select the applicable standard according to your firm. So if you are using American English, you will always try and look for the AE. If you are using British English, you will look for the BRE. And of course, if you are in a specific country with their own section, you will go and select those. So there are a variety. If you are a network, you can select more than one of these. For the purpose of our getting started video, we will use AE International. This is the language in which the ISQM 1 standard was written and released by the IAASB. The next part in setup is your risk assessment setting or your risk thresholds. The standard requires you to assess each risk in terms of the probability of it occurring, as well as the effect that it can have on your achievement of the quality objectives. Depending on your ratings for each of these, you can then select what your risk assessment would be for those. In other words, this is where you set your risk thresholds, that when you get to assessing the risks later on, everybody will consistently be assessing the same levels of risk. Next up then, you will determine the type of response that is required for each of these thresholds. Now, if there is, for example, applied judgment, as a firm, you can decide to apply judgment for both low and medium, as an example, or you can decide that both of these will always be moderate, or both of them will be applied judgment as you wish. All right, so this is up to the firm to decide. Note that I cannot change anything here because it's already been signed off by another user. I first need to remove the sign off before I can make any changes. And then I have to sign it off again in order for it to take effect. Next is the understanding section. Now, in our understanding section, the firm is required to document their understanding of the nature and the circumstances of the firm, as well as the engagements that the firm performs. And this understanding will assist the firm in identifying various conditions, events, circumstances, actions, or inactions that may adversely affect the achievement of the quality objectives, and therefore, of course, result in the recording of possible quality risks. Questions have been included, and where applicable, you can either enter some information and go to next lines, increase the size of the cell as you need to. In some other cases, it may be necessary for you to just select the right option, and where the question requires a number answer, you can also just insert or select a number. Again, each of these items need to be signed off as prepared by the person that completed them. Right at the bottom, we have the conclusion. Again, this is where the person or the user with ultimate responsibility should be reviewing the responses recorded above and then approve that all the information has been included, and of course, as a result thereof, the objectives and the risks identified for the firm's system of quality management is complete. And that person will click agree and sign off. You can then see my name and the date. Then we move to the firm's risk assessment process, which of course includes identifying the objectives, identifying risks, assessing them, and developing responses. This is still all in the design mode. In objectives, as for risks, policy responses, procedure, and tasks, we can add any new items, and you can add a risk in if you are looking at objectives, or you can add an objective anywhere where you use this little plus sign. I will select objective. I will complete the information. Note the red asterisk, of course, as usually required before you can save one. You select the component to which this objective relates. Explain or discuss. Fill in any of the other information and click Save at the bottom. Note, something like an applicable standard is only required where you have selected more than one standard. If you are only working in one standard, then it will always be your applicable standard. Effective dates to and from, as for all the other elements, is only required where you have identified that it will only be effective from a specific date, or in other cases later on where you've been identifying or using this objective, risk, etc. Then when you want to have a sunset date, you've decided that this risk or this policy, this procedure response is no longer applicable, then you can add an effective to date. Again, in setting up your system initially, these items can basically be left blank. Once you have selected risks, you can also select a risk from those that you have identified. But when we record risks later on, we will also be able to link those up as necessary. Just to show you where that objective is now, I can either scroll until I find it, but I also remember that in the ID, I gave it something about GS for getting started. And so I can then very quickly identify my objective. I can open it to view the detail. I can edit it. I could delete it. And because I've got this button here, it tells me everything that's necessary and that's required in order to sign this off as prepared by is correct. And I can sign it off as prepared by. Some other elements to note in this user view. If you want to sort items, a few useful tools to use in this database, because as you can see it gets quite long, is to sort according to any of the columns that has a sort option. You can filter, and you can also sort by or group by in dragging a heading to the top, and that will then group your objectives in this case according to the component. Once you're done with that, simply move it back and it will go to the column where you want it. You can also choose which columns to see by selecting the column chooser. Scrolling up and down will tell you what else you can have a look at. You can simply untick it if you don't want to see it, or tick it if you do want to see it. Also, if there is a column that you want to increase or decrease, those can be moved quite easily. Another function is the export function, which will export all the data in this objective screen to Excel. Moving on to risks. In risks, you will also see all your risks. You can, again, record a risk. You can link your objectives. Let's select that one. Just click outside, then have a title. You do also have the library function. So you are able to select risks from the library. Remember, these risks are suggested risks and suggested links to objectives, so you are able to adjust them. Let's just select the top one for the sake of illustration. So we are identifying conducting an annual evaluation as the risk. Now to see the detail, again, just expand and you can see the detail of the risk. I have selected the risk and now I will click select risk. The majority of my risk is now completed. I can of course modify, change the ID, etc. I can add an additional description, but remember that this is your risk for your firm, so edit it as you feel is necessary. Again, links, applicable standards, and a variety of other information is available. Now, you are able to save this risk in your system at this stage, but you will not be able to move forward with this, sign it off as prepared by, until you've done your risk assessment. And that is what happens in your risk assessment: probability of occurrence and risk assessment effect on achievement of objectives. Now remember, we set our threshold. So the response here is that because I selected unlikely and moderate, the response required is that I have to apply my judgment as to whether or not response is required. I can add a reason for risk rating, but I must now decide, will there be no response, moderate, or significant response? I will select moderate response. Again, you can add an explanation. Any of the other parts can be relevant. As with the risk earlier with the objective, I can link a response if I know of one already, or I can link it later on. You will notice here that I'm not able to sign this risk off as prepared by, which means that there is still something that I need to go and complete. I will therefore open the risk, edit it, and complete the information until I'm able to sign off. Moving on to policy responses. Policy responses includes a list of mandatory responses. Now, mandatory refers to the standard's specific responses. The standard requires for some elements to have either a policy or a procedure or both for certain specific risks. And so we've highlighted them as mandatory so that you can know not to forget about them. But it does not mean that you do need a policy for each procedure. If you feel that you can address a procedure only, that is perfectly fine. You will then, however, have to choose the generic policy to say that you have a procedure only. There we have it right there at the top, policy 1, procedure only, and so therefore I don't have a policy. If I do have a policy, I can select a policy from the policy library, or I can go and design my own policy. Policy response will be the detail. And I will save it. Having completed my policy, I'm able to sign that off as prepared by and move on to the procedure. Procedure responses are very similar to the policy responses, only this is where I will describe the what I will be doing. This is the action. How will the firm ensure that the policy is executed or implemented? So it includes a bit more detail. Again, you can add a procedure response, you can link it to the policy, and everything will be linked. So to show you, now a procedure response, in other words, will have a linked policy with a linked task. The task is a form that the staff will use to show that they have executed or implemented a procedure. Let's move on to tasks. Tasks is the firm's way of having staff record or evidence that procedures were executed and implemented. Again, there is a library of tasks, for example, a training attendance register, a gift register, annual declaration, etc. Let's have a look at the gift register. The majority of the items is already included here. Once I've linked the procedure and selected the task from the library, I have the form editor. Now the form editor is where, from a Caseware side, we've already prepared a form for you, but of course you can go and edit it as you feel fit. You can simply drag a field, in this case text field, let's say enter your name, select where it should be, left aligned, and a few other items, and click save. And your new line has been added to the form. This is then where the firm has the ability to edit forms to their needs. Once you've completed everything, there will always be a submit button at the bottom, and you can click save form. Again, applicable standard and the other parts can be completed as necessary, and you click save for this task. Having then worked through all of the elements in your risk assessment process, now we go to review and publish. This is the place where you will review your draft system of quality management. You are also able to approve this system, and then once it's been approved, to publish it. And if you need to export it, let's say for example in the case of a network where you've set up your network system with your network required objectives, policies, procedures, tasks, etc., you can then export this to share with your member firms. Let's see how we will go about reviewing our draft system of quality management. I can expand each of the objectives all the way through until I have seen everything that's linked to this objective. Now, in the case of our first objective, we have the objective with a linked risk and a linked policy. Thereafter, we have a warning. Now, this warning is just to say, just double check, make sure, is this a problem? If not, then you can go ahead, still approve and publish. So in this case, it's telling us that there is a policy, but there is no linked procedure. This, of course, is possible. Maybe not likely, but possible, and that is why it will allow you to publish. Our next objective has all the elements required: objective, risk, policy, procedure, and then ultimately the task. Now, we have an error here for the last line. I approved a risk, and this risk does not have a linked objective or a linked policy. Now, for either of those, I will have a warning which will prevent me from approving my system. So if I click approve here, it will tell me that there are errors and I need to first fix them. And of course, if you haven't approved your system, you cannot publish it. So we first need to address this risk, either then linking it to an objective, or if we accidentally added this risk and it shouldn't have been there, or whatever the case is, then we can go back to the risks and remove it. Operate is the space where your staff will view the published system of quality management, where they can see who has been assigned which responsibilities, and also where they will go and perform tasks. In other words, there's no action for staff in the first two, but the tasks is where they can see what tasks they have completed and whether they have already submitted them or whether they've only just started them and still need to submit. You will also go to the add task section. Note that here you can only add tasks. You will select a specific task and add a description so that you can differentiate between them. For example, training attendance. I might say this was the annual training on ethics, and perhaps include a date. And click on create to create that form so that we can start completing the form. Operate overview is the space where those assigned the ultimate and operational responsibility will manage tasks with staff. This will be where you will have dashboards to see who has or hasn't completed the task, who is behind, and where there are problems. Thank you for watching our Getting Started video.